Oh, here we go. Right, that's right. There we go. So, right. Okay, so there's an additional item that's on the list, which isn't in that list there, which is about towing. Okay, and I've popped that in for a reason, request of Martin. So the first bit will be about the rigging of picos, and I believe some of you were down there last week to do that. So that should be pretty much just a resume. We'll look at the 5 essentials, which are getting the optimum out of your boat. And that's the sort of thing that I would like, Martin in particular would like you to focus in on at all times when you're sailing the boat. Rules of the road, I think, are quite important. It was certainly busy on the water last year. It will be busy this year as well. So I think that's key. I'll have a chat about tides and how to get in and out of the river, depending on what the tidal circumstances are. We'll have a chat about weather and how you can assess the weather conditions before you turn up for the evening. And then I'll talk about coming alongside and beaching. So this is a video that was taken at in Poole Harbour, and I think it's a pretty good one for rigging a pico.
Just check where the wind's coming.
Can you hear that?
Into the wind, so the wind will wiggle up. It's not going to be overpowered. Okay, so check.
Right, I have to. For some reason, it's jumped. Which is annoying.
Next thing we need to do.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Right.
It's just stepped in with a mast gate on the front of it. Making sure that you watch out for the end of the mast, onto an angle, into the bottom of the boat, making sure that your sleeve comes underneath the deck plate and slide it forward so that the mast gate comes across. Next thing we need to do is lock that off, and that's just with a simple T. Okay? So the pin goes down through the hole. Once it's in, we lock it off like so. Okay? So down through, all the way through, and make sure she's locked off and held in. Okay? That's our mast now in the upright position. Next, we're going to move back to the rudder. Okay, so with the rudder, the first thing you need to make sure is that the rudder blade comes underneath your horse or your traveller. So make sure that comes over and your tiller bar over the top. Okay, just at the back of the boat, the same with all the other boats. You've got a set of pin tools and dodgeys. Line them up and pop them in and make sure that retaining clip just hooks her on and that she is underneath your traveller. Okay, with our boom, very simple. At the front, you've got a horseshoe that just sits above the black plate on the mast. So all we're going to do is pop her on like so. Next job is to unfurl the sail. Just a little ribbon hook onto the sail. Run that all the way. Out. Okay, making sure that the little D-ring is facing towards the back of the boat. Work your way along the sail, okay, until you've got your back cringle. Don't worry about the little bit ribbon, you're looking for the cringle. And on our boom, okay, on our boom we've got our outhaul with one bit of elastic and the rest rope. On there is a hook. All we're going to do, make Next thing we need to do is tighten up our outhole. All you do is pull the side of the line without the elastic on towards the mast. When you've got it as tight as you want it, into the climb plate on the top of the boom. Okay, and that's our outhole set. Next thing we need to do is attach our kicking strap. Okay, so make sure she's loosened off. The leaving that we mentioned a moment ago, that's where that clips onto. And then just a simple pull to tighten her up. Your main sheet should all be attached, but just make sure that that's running freely. And finally, the last thing we'll do is put our dagboard through the slot and we're ready to go.
Okay, I can send you, anybody who's interested, we can make sure the link is sent through to you on that. It's just an extract of from YouTube. One thing I'll cover in more detail is the main sheet, which quite often is not rigged, okay? Were there any other particular points from that video that needs clarification?
I think the lack of the fact she didn't describe the main sheet is probably the main thing.
Right. Okay, so hopefully you can see this now. Just got an extract of the top, Pico dinghy. You've got the tiller there, and then the strop or horse, making sure that the horse goes over the tiller, because that's a bit of a downer if you end up on the water having left the pontoon, and it's not. You generally got a loose kicker. It might already be attached to the mast, but it is loose. And then you've got a block on the boom and a block on the top of the horse. So you take the main sheet down from the block on the boom, around the block on the horse, back up to the boom, along, and then down to the cockpit, just like that. Okay, so you work from the end of the boom, around the horse, and then back to the center of the cockpit. Okay. Any questions on that? I think we're all right.
To put a stopper knot in or not?
Yeah, right. Yes, it's a valid point. Probably yes, I would put a stopper knot in. So that's a figure of 8 on the end of this, just so that you don't end up losing the bit of string when you most need it. Good question. Right, 5 essentials. So what I've got here is another video. It's again quite concentrated, so I will attempt to stop it at intervals as we go through the 5 essentials, which is balance. So that's basically how much you're leaning out on the boat or in towards the center of the boat to keep the boat level. Trim, which is fore and aft, like a seesaw. Use of the dagger board, which is pretty obvious on a Pico, perhaps not so obvious on, say, a 2-handed boat, but it's still present. Sail set, and then course made good. And course made good, I'll cover basically a lot of the stuff that to do with coming in and out of harbour, particularly the Hamble River. So this is the video, and again, we'll send you the link.
Sailing's a dynamic sport. Everything's changing. The wind, the water, and the direction our boat's going. We have a checklist of 5 essentials, which really means that we get the best out of our boat in all conditions. The most important is balance, and that means keeping the boat level as much as possible. In later courses, we will learn how to use heel to improve speed, but for now, keep the boat flat. Fore and aft trim.
Okay, I think that's probably the most obvious one, to be honest with you, with any luck, and hopefully something that certainly if you've sailed a Pico, you're familiar with. So we'll then move on to boat trim.
Is also important. sit too far back and the stern drags and the bow is way out of the water. In the right position, the whole length of the boat is sitting nicely on the water. Go too far.
Yeah, so it's pretty obvious from where we're sitting in the rib alongside the boat that you've got the longest length of waterline in the boat. This is going upwind, by the way. Okay, it's slightly different if you're going downwind, but so it's longest length in the boat, and it's approximately where the main sheet is. So not surprisingly, it's in the right place if you're feeling uncomfortable.
Forward and the bow digs in and the rudder lifts up.
Okay, so there you can clearly see how far out of the water, albeit there's a bit of a hill on it, how far out of the water the stern of the boat is. And that's removing some of the waterline length, which is useful to have.
In the correct position, the boat will feel much easier to steer. The third of the 5 essentials is the position of the daggerboard. If you want to sail upwind, it should be right down, giving maximum side force. Lift the daggerboard about a third if you want to go reaching across the wind. The extra speed will give the same side force with less board in the water. About halfway to go downwind. Sailing downwind, you don't need much sideways resistance from the board, and so raising it up will reduce drag and you'll sail even faster.
I think the key thing about this is actually have a go. That's what I would emphasise. Again, you know, if you've done the drills that Martin's got you doing, whatever they are, and you're on your way home or whatever, try pulling the daggerboard up in the Pico or any other boat you'll happen to be in, and just see the effect at various points of sailing. It's a good learning point, and as I will demonstrate later on, there are some useful features to be had from lifting up the daggerboard. Probably the key point I would make about this is if you're in gusty conditions, which is not unknown by any stretch of the imagination in the Hamble River, then pull up the daggerboard a little bit, about, you know, a third, maybe less than a third anyway. But you'll find that when the gust hits, and we're talking about unexpected gusts, the boat will slip sideways rather than being blown over. So if you feel yourself, you know, maybe you've had a bit too much to drink before you came out. Oh no, I shouldn't say that. But if you're feeling your reactions are a bit slower than normal, and you're suffering with the boat, pull the daggerboard up, and you'll find that the boat slips sideways and takes the edge off those gusts. So that's again something worth trying when you're not in the conditions that you actually need to use it, and it will remind you of that as a potential aid to your sailing.
Fourth of the 5 essentials is sail setting. As you go from one course to another, you also need to adjust your sail settings. Here I'm sailing close to the wind with the sail in tight, and now easing the sail out, turning onto a reach, and then easing the sail out more. And now I'm on a run, projecting as much sail area as I can towards the wind. And finally, when you're learning to sail...
Okay, I'm going to go through sail set in more detail in some slides that follow this one, okay?
It's very easy to have all your focus on what's going on in your boat. But remember to check your steering. Make sure you're actually going where you want to go. We'll call this course made good.
And again, I'll go through that later on. We'll send you both those links so you can review those in your own time. So, okay, sail set. I think one way of explaining this, not the only way, but one way, is you all know that if the boat's pointed directly into the winds, the sail will flap. Then if you let the boat bear off, go away from the wind, then the sails will fill. And it's normally, that angle in there is normally about 45 degrees, okay? And that's beating to windward. And you can see how we've got the sails hard in. And you'll see where the jib and the mainsail, in this case, are on relative to the hull of the boat. They're hard in. If we've got a boat on a reach, let's just try this one on you. The sail relative to the wind is in exactly the same place. It's only the boat that's turned away from the wind. The sail set is the same as far as the wind direction is concerned. So I've literally just moved that sail from a close haul boat onto a beam reach boat, and it's got the same sail shape. Same with the mainsail. Okay, so that's effectively the most efficient sail shape, whichever direction you're pointing, other than dead downwind, okay, which we'll just come on to. So this is a reach, somewhere tight reach, somewhere between the two, and it's the same sail shape. Dead downwind, effectively, you could literally have a plank of wood going dead downwind. All you've got to do is stand up and the wind will blow you downwind. So there's nothing sophisticated about it. And your primary aim is to project as much area to the wind as you can. So here's a plank of wood, and we've acquired a Viking square sail, and that will achieve just as much as this boat on the left. Except the fact that in this particular case, we hadn't got it goose winged. So we can actually goose wing the boat. In other words, put the jib on one side and the mainsail on the other. And then you'll get a similar sail area presented to the wind. Okay, the other one was course made good. Now I'm going to be specific to the River Hamble, which is obviously the area that we're probably most familiar with. And I'll look at two situations, one where the tide's coming in and you're trying to get out, and one's where the tide's going out and you're trying to get back in. Okay, so obviously with the tide will be strongest in the deepest water. Okay, so in this particular case, hang on a minute, excuse me. Right, there we are, that's better. Right, I can see what I'm doing now. Right, in this particular case, we've got the tide coming in, and the worst thing you can do is probably just go down the green line, which is right in the middle of the river, because you'll be seeing that full 2 knots of tide. Your options are to go for the shallow water, which can be on the Hamble side or the Warsash side. So nothing difficult about that, I hope. Okay, so what about going home? Tide's going out. How are we going to avoid the tide? And it's exactly the same as before. You want to avoid these spots if you can. The maximum tidal conditions when the tide's going out is about where the double post is, okay? And the other area to avoid is this area by, sorry, that's the double post. Yeah, that's the double post. No, that's upstream of the double post, beg your pardon. There's an area where it's shoals quite steeply. So, and this has shallowed up. You know, this chart is probably a couple of years old, and it's certainly quite shallow. So, don't be tempted to go inside this green beacon when you can see the ground inside it. The other area which is worth noting is around the area where the lifeboats are. And if the wind's coming from where the lifeboats are, then you will get disrupted air. Okay. So your options really are to obviously avoid the maximum tide. You want to hug the posts either side. And then certainly on the Warsash side, you'll get a significant reduction in tidal strength beyond this post here. And you can hug the shallow ground and make good progress until you get to the lifeboats. if you go down the other side, you'll actually get an eddy. In other words, by eddy, I'm talking about a tide that actually flows in the opposite direction to the main tidal stream. So although the main tidal stream is going out, you'll actually get a beneficial tidal stream bringing you back in, which you can use to your advantage. The only downside, really, of using the handle side is the fact that it quite often is further for you. You have to cross this very strong flow to get to it, more often than not. And in the process, you won't make so much headway. So indeed, if that's the case, it doesn't matter which side of the river you go up, the actual time it takes you will be about the same. The advantage, one advantage of the handle side is that you are able to miss this turbulent air, which is in the region of the lifeboats. So that's particularly useful if you've got very light winds. The other benefit is that you can normally miss the peak tide that is quite focused around those lifeboats. So that's one plan, is to go down the Warsash side. And then as soon as you're past the pontoons, duck down into the shallow ground again before reaching home. And this is the alternative. Cross over, which will obviously have to be going through this peak tide area, then get onto shallow ground, pick up the conveyor belt that will take you into the river, and then go quite close to the pontoon in the middle of the river, and that'll help you as well, because that will drag on the water strength and aid you into the river. Let's just go back one. Right, there was a lot of information there. Is there any questions on that?
In terms of priority and rules of the road, are you supposed to be on one side of the river going in and the other side of the river going out? You know, when you've got that's a good question, Karen. Yeah, theoretically, you're supposed to be on the starboard side. What I would say, so in other words, if you're going into the river, you need to be on the Warsash side. However, you're generally you're in a lot shallower water than the main boats going into the river. Whichever side you go, you can make sure you're in shallower water than the boats that are going up and down the river. They will generally stay inside the pylon, the piles in the main flow. So that shouldn't really be a concern. I suppose the only issue is when you're crossing over the river at this point here, you obviously want to time it such that you're not trying to interfere with other boats because they might get a bit confused about what your aims are. It's easy for other boats to get confused, let's put it that way. But yeah, no, that's a good point. But so generally, you theoretically, you should be on the starboard side of the channel. But as far as a dinghy is concerned, certainly if you're batting the tide, strong tide, you're trying to keep out of it, you shall be in shallow water and nobody's going to interfere with you there. Any other questions at all? I suppose I better say people should put their hand up if they want to.
I think the key thing is if you're going slowly, then there's usually a reason, okay? So if you're going slowly, look around you, look at other boats, seeing what they're doing. And if you see somebody going faster, they've probably got it more right than you have. Okay, right, we'll move on. Rules of the road. I'm going to sort of just pose these three at you as the main ones. And the first one's the most important, to be honest with you. Mike is right, and which basically means that if he's bigger than you, stay out of his way. Now, that might seem a bit harsh, but that's the environment we do live in. Okay, we'll talk about port and starboard, and we'll talk about windward and leeward. Okay, so we'll go through those in turn. So Mike is right. By that, I would take the example of a 45-foot motorboat. When he engages his engines, he's probably doing a minimum speed of 6 to 8 knots. Okay, once his engines are engaged, he will be moving at a minimum speed of 6 to 8 knots. There's very little he can do about that, and so I think we should respect that as a limitation of what they can do. Their visibility is quite often limited. In fact, it's quite often a he, shall we say? So I'll just continue using that word. If he's stuck inside his wheelhouse, his visibility will be quite restricted. He'll also be concerned about what's behind him, not just you who is in front of him. So there may be other boats overtaking him. So there is a lot going on inside a wheelhouse of a 45-foot powerboat. So although he is power and theoretically he gives way to you, or I would say that on the whole, you should be sympathetic to his problems that he's got. Yes, okay. And the obvious thing is that quite often they're on a jolly and there are distractions, music, entertainment, and indeed drink. And the other thing is, certainly in the last few years, there's been a lot of people who've taken up the water sports, and they don't have an awful lot of experience. And they certainly don't have any experience of a sailing boat tacking out of the river. Okay, so they will be surprised that you are seemingly going across the channel for no apparent reason and then suddenly going back across it again in exactly the opposite direction. They won't be familiar with that as a problem. Okay. Right, okay, so how do we deal with that? Obviously, as Karen said, boats going into the river will be on the Warsash side, the starboard side, as you're going into the river, and then boats coming out of the river will be alongside the pontoon. You can utilise gaps between the pontoons on the Warsash side. So things like where the Harbour Master's office is, and maybe where the Warsash Sailing Club pontoon is. You can use gaps there to pop yourself in there. Nobody else is going to follow you in other than maybe another boat from the sailing club. Get the timing right, and you can pop out in a gap that appears. Obviously, if you got the wind behind you, there's no issues with tacking, and you can pretty much make your way out of the river just by hugging the shallow water, like I've said before. And that rule applies if you're in a 45-foot sailing boat going to the Isles of Scilly in poor visibility, just as much as it does in the River Hamble. If you're in restricted visibility, or you're worried about other big ships, if you get yourself on shallow ground, you're out of any problems. Okay, so let's go back over talking about tacking out of the river. Just use the gaps between the boats to extend your tacks and to time them such that you are able to make progress but not impede the progress of other boats. You can also obviously use Kipper Pond when there's water in there. There's plenty of water in there at high water, use it. And an alternative is to go down alongside the pontoon, but you can see that your options are very much more restricted. You don't have so much room, and if you get it wrong or they get it wrong, it can be painful. So I would generally advise you to go down the Warsash side. You've got far more options down the Warsash side. Let's just go back quickly. Any questions from that? Any show of hands? No?
I think people have to unmute themselves if they want to ask a question. That's probably the best bet.
Yeah. Okay. As I say, I'm conscious there's a lot of information going in here, but hopefully a lot of it will be a refresher for you. Port and starboard. So if you've got two sailing boats coming towards one another, then the boat that's on port in other words, the wind's coming over the port side, is the give way vessel. The boat that's coming up with the wind on the starboard side is the stand-on vessel. There's no phrase like right of way used here, and that's key. It's quite possible that this boat that is on port tack has not seen you, in which case you can either give fair warning, by which I would say a good 15 seconds is what I mean by a fair warning, not 2 seconds, or you then have to take avoiding action. And probably the easiest way to take avoiding action is to tack. If you suddenly bear away and they see you, they may decide to bear away as well, in which case it's not good. It's not going to end well. Okay, so 9 times out of 10, if you think that you haven't given the person enough warning, probably the easiest thing to do and the safest thing to do is to tack off and put yourself on port tack at that point in time. Yeah, okay. You have no right of way, and a collision should be avoided at all times. And as I say, I think 15 seconds is, certainly more than 10, is sort of the amount of warning you should be giving people. And if you haven't given them that, it should be down to you to try and get out of the situation without too much pain. Okay, windward and leeward boats. The windward boat is the one that is closer to where the wind is coming from. And this is the give way vessel. And if you're in the other one, in other words, further away from where the wind's coming, you are the stand-on vessel. So here we've got a boat on port tack and a boat on starboard tack, and it's on starboard tack because the wind is blowing into the mainsail and is blowing it onto the port side of the boat. So that is a starboard tack vessel. Yes, the jib is out on the other side of the boat, but it's the mainsail that counts in this situation. So this boat here, the starboard tack boat, is actually to windward of the boat that's on port tack, but you can see that it's the fact that that boat is on starboard tack that takes priority over windward and leeward. Okay, port and starboard takes priority over windward, leeward. That's why I've introduced that diagram. Let's just go back one. Okay, any questions from us at all?
So the 15 seconds warning that you mentioned, what am I expecting them to do in that 15 seconds?
Yeah, so if you've got a boat that's approaching you on port tack and it's theoretically you're the stand-on vessel, if you've given them 15 seconds to work out what they need to do to avoid you, that's adequate warning, I would say. They can either tack, so tack onto starboard tack, just like the same tack as you are, or they can bear away and go underneath your stern. And
if in 15 seconds they've done neither, that's the point where you think, oh, well,
yeah,
that'd be me that does the avoiding action.
Exactly. Yeah, and the body language will tell you that, really. You look at it's no different from when you're driving a car. You can tell whether they're aware of your presence and just drive defensively. There isn't a lot of room in the river at times, particularly maybe on a Tuesday night